For 6 years, she walked to her mailbox at the exact same time every morning. A quiet routine no one ever questioned. Neighbors passed by, people came and went, and no one really saw her. But a Marine and his canine did. They noticed the consistency, the discipline, the intention behind it. And when that routine suddenly stopped, when she didn't show up one morning, they knew something was wrong. Because routines like that don't just disappear without a reason. And by the time anyone else realized she was gone, it was already too late. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. The morning air in Asheville carried a soft chill, thin fog drifting between quiet suburban houses as the sun struggled to break through the pale gray sky. Staff Sergeant Ryan Vance moved at a steady pace along the cracked sidewalk, his breath controlled, his posture straight, even in something as simple as a morning run. At 38, Ryan still carried the unmistakable presence of a U.S. Marine. Tall at just over 6 feet, lean but hardened, with a frame built through years of disciplined training rather than vanity. His short dark hair was cut close to the scalp, military clean, and the faint line of stubble shadowed his jaw, giving his face a permanent edge. A thin scar traced just beneath his right cheekbone, pale against weathered skin, a quiet reminder of a past he rarely spoke about. His eyes, sharp, observant, and often distant, moved constantly, taking in everything without seeming to focus on anything at all. Beside him ran Axel, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a powerful, athletic build and a coat of rich amber and black that caught even the dull morning light. Axel's ears stood alert, his movements precise and efficient, every step calculated. He wasn't just a pet, he was trained, disciplined, and deeply attuned to Ryan's every shift in energy. Where Ryan was controlled, Axel was instinct refined into form. The dog's amber eyes scanned their surroundings with quiet intensity, always working, always aware. They followed the same route they had taken for nearly a year now. Same streets, same turns, same quiet rhythm. It was the kind of routine Ryan relied on, not because he needed predictability, but because after years of chaos, he chose it. Out here, in the stillness of a town that didn't ask questions, he could exist without explanation. And every morning, at exactly 9:15, there was one detail that never changed. The house sat slightly back from the road, a modest, aging structure with faded white paint and a front porch that leaned just enough to suggest time had passed, but not enough to demand repair. The yard was unkempt, grass growing unevenly, patches of weeds overtaking what might once have been a garden. And at the edge of the narrow driveway stood a simple metal mailbox, its red flag always lowered, its surface dulled by years of sun and rain. That was where Helen Whitaker appeared. Helen was a woman somewhere in her late 70s, small in stature, her frame thin but not frail. Her silver-gray hair was always tied back loosely, strands escaping around her face in a way that suggested she cared just enough to be presentable, but not enough to be concerned. Her skin carried the soft creases of age, pale and slightly weathered, but her eyes, when they lifted, held something sharper, something that didn't quite match the quiet life she seemed to live. She moved slowly, deliberately, one hand often brushing the porch railing as she stepped down, not out of weakness, but habit. Every day, without fail, she walked down the short stone path, opened the mailbox, and looked inside. Not quickly, not casually. She would pause there for several seconds, as if waiting for something that never quite arrived. Then she would close it gently, turn, and walk back inside without looking around. Ryan had noticed her months ago. At first, she had been nothing more than part of the background, a fixed point in a moving world. But over time, something about her consistency stood out. In a life where nothing had ever stayed the same for long, her routine felt intentional. Axel had noticed her too. Not in a reactive way. The dog never barked, never showed aggression. But every time they passed, Axel's head would tilt slightly, his gaze lingering just a fraction longer than usual. Ryan had caught it more than once, not enough to act on, just enough to remember. Their silent exchange became its own quiet ritual. As Ryan approached, Helen would sometimes glance up, her expression unreadable. Ryan would lift 2 fingers briefly in acknowledgement, a habit carried over from years of unspoken communication in uniform. She never waved back, but there was always the smallest pause in her movement, as if she had noticed, It was enough. Until the morning she wasn't there. Ryan didn't slow down the first time. The porch was empty, the mailbox untouched, the house still. He registered it, filed it away, and kept moving. People missed days, routines broke, it didn't mean anything. Axel, however, slowed, just for a second. Ryan felt the slight tension on the leash, glanced down, then forward again. "Keep moving," he muttered under his breath. Axel obeyed immediately, falling back into step without resistance. That was day 1. Day 2, the absence felt heavier. The porch still empty, the door still closed, no movement behind the curtains. This time, Axel stopped. Not a stumble, not hesitation, a full stop. His body stiffened slightly, ears forward, eyes locked on the house. Ryan stopped too, more out of instinct than intention. He followed Axel's gaze, scanning the property. Nothing obvious, no broken windows, no open doors, just stillness. Too much stillness. "Axel." The command was quiet, controlled. Axel didn't move immediately. That alone was enough to shift something in Ryan's chest. Then, slowly, the dog stepped forward again. Ryan didn't speak the rest of the run. By day 3, the feeling wasn't subtle anymore. As they approached the house, Axel's pace slowed on his own. His muscles tightened, his head lowering slightly as his focus narrowed. Ryan felt it before it happened, the shift in the dog's energy, the way his breathing changed, the way his attention locked in. Then Axel stopped. This time, he didn't move. A low growl vibrated through his chest, not loud, not aggressive, but deep and controlled. The kind of sound that didn't come from fear, but certainty. Ryan's grip on the leash tightened instinctively. His eyes snapped to the house, scanning faster now, sharper. Every window, every shadow, every inch of the porch. Nothing moved, but everything felt wrong. He crouched slightly beside Axel, his voice low. "What is it?" Axel didn't look at him. The dog's eyes remained fixed on the front door. Ryan exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening as something old and familiar began to settle into place in his mind. It was the same feeling he had learned not to ignore years ago, the quiet alarm that came before things went bad. The kind that didn't need evidence yet, the kind that kept people alive. Routines don't just stop, not like that, not after 6 years. Ryan straightened slowly, his gaze hardening as he looked at the empty porch again. 3 days, no sign, no variation, just absence. Behind him, the street carried on as usual, cars passing, distant voices, the soft hum of a normal morning. But here, in front of this house, it felt like something had been cut out of the world entirely. Ryan didn't move, neither did Axel. And for the first time since he had left the Marines, Ryan Vance felt that same unmistakable pull towards something he knew he couldn't walk away from. Something had happened inside that house, and whatever it was, Axel had known before he did. The silence around the house felt heavier than it should have, pressing in from all sides, as if the world itself had stepped back and refused to interfere. Ryan Vance stood at the edge of the narrow driveway, his posture still, his eyes fixed on the front door that hung just slightly off its frame. It wasn't wide open. It wasn't closed. It was wrong. The kind of wrong most people would dismiss without thinking twice, but Ryan wasn't most people. Years in the Marines had carved something into him that never really left, the ability to read absence the same way others read presence. Beside him, Axel remained tense, his body angled forward, weight shifted subtly onto his front paws. The dog's ears were locked in place, his gaze unwavering. There was no confusion in him, no hesitation, just certainty. Ryan exhaled slowly, scanning the house one more time before stepping forward. Gravel crunched softly under his boots as he moved up the path, each step deliberate, controlled. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't hesitating either. This was the space between instinct and action, the moment where everything slowed down just enough to matter. When he reached the porch, the boards creaked faintly beneath his weight. Up close, the details sharpened. The paint on the door was chipped near the handle, worn by years of use. The screen door hung loosely on its hinge, shifting slightly with the breeze. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, but nothing about it felt right. Ryan raised his hand and knocked. Once. Firm. The sound echoed inside, hollow and distant. He waited, listening. No movement, no footsteps, no voice answering back. He knocked again, louder this time. "Ma'am?" His voice cut clean through the silence. "Helen?" Still nothing. Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. He shifted his weight, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the gap between the door and the frame. It wasn't forced open. It had been left that way. Or interrupted. Behind him, Axel let out a low breath, not quite a growl, but close enough to pull Ryan's attention. The dog's stance hadn't changed, but there was something sharper in his focus now. Ryan reached out and pushed the door. It gave easily. The hinges released a slow, tired creak as the door swung inward, revealing a dim interior where the air felt cooler than outside. Not cold, just still, as if it hadn't moved in a while. Ryan stepped inside. Immediately, the smell hit him. Not decay, not anything that obvious, but something stale, interrupted. The kind of scent that came from a space where life had been paused mid-motion. His eyes adjusted quickly, taking in the room piece by piece. The first thing he saw was the chair. It lay on its side near a small kitchen table, one leg twisted slightly at an unnatural angle. Not broken completely, just bent enough to suggest force. Ryan's gaze lingered there for half a second before shifting. A ceramic teacup lay shattered across the tile floor, fragments spread outward in a rough arc. A faint dried stain marked where liquid had once pooled, before settling into the grout lines. He stepped forward slowly, boots careful against the debris, his attention moving in short, precise sweeps. Nothing was overturned in chaos. Nothing screamed violence. That was the problem. It looked controlled. Near the hallway, a small rug was pushed out of place, bunched unevenly as if something, or someone, had been dragged across it. Ryan crouched slightly, studying the pattern. The fibers were compressed in one direction, not random, not accidental. His mind began to assemble the scene automatically, each detail slotting into place with quiet efficiency. Movement, resistance, interruption. He stood again, his gaze lifting toward the hallway. That's when he saw it. A single slipper lay on its side near the wall, its pair nowhere in sight. It wasn't positioned neatly. It wasn't kicked off casually. It had been left behind. Ryan stepped closer, bending down to pick it up. It was light, worn at the heel, the fabric soft from years of use. He turned it once in his hand, then set it back exactly where he found it. People don't leave like this. Not willingly. Behind him, Axel entered the house without needing to be told. The dog moved low and quiet, nose close to the ground, following a scent Ryan couldn't detect. His movements were deliberate, tracing invisible lines through the room. Ryan watched him for a moment, trusting the process. Axel paused near the hallway, then shifted direction slightly, as if recalibrating. His tail remained still, his focus absolute. "Easy," Ryan murmured, more out of habit than necessity. The house remained silent. Too silent. Ryan moved deeper, checking each doorway with practiced precision. The bedroom, empty. The bathroom, undisturbed. No signs of packing. No indication of someone preparing to leave. Everything remained exactly as it should have been, except for the disruption, which meant one thing. This wasn't a departure. It was an extraction. Ryan stepped back into the main room, his mind already moving ahead. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, dialing without hesitation. The line connected quickly. Asheville PD, a voice answered, steady and professional. Ryan glanced once more at the overturned chair, the broken cup, the displaced rug. "This is Ryan Vance," he said, his tone calm but firm. "I'm at 214 Maple Ridge. I need officers here. Possible abduction." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Can you confirm signs of forced entry?" Ryan's eyes shifted to the door behind him. No forced entry, but the scene's been disturbed. This wasn't voluntary. Units are on the way. Ryan ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped outside, scanning the street again, but this time with a different focus. Not routine, not habit, memory. And then it came back to him. 2 nights ago, a van. White, no windows, parked just down the street, engine idling, lights off. At the time, it hadn't registered as more than a passing detail, just another vehicle in a quiet neighborhood. Now, it stood out like a missing piece snapping into place. Ryan's jaw tightened as the realization settled. This wasn't random. It was an opportunity. It had been planned. Behind him, Axel stepped out onto the porch, stopping just at Ryan's side. The dog's head lifted slightly, his nose testing the air as if searching for something that had already passed. Ryan followed his gaze down the street. "Yeah," he muttered quietly. "You saw it too, didn't you?" Axel didn't respond. He didn't need to. In the distance, faint but growing louder, the sound of sirens began to cut through the morning air. But Ryan didn't feel relief, because he already knew something the police hadn't caught up to yet. Whoever had taken Helen Whitaker had known exactly what they were doing, and they hadn't come here by accident. The late morning light flattened the street into something deceptively calm, as if nothing had changed, as if the absence of one person could dissolve without consequence into the rhythm of everyday life. Ryan Vance stood near the curb, watching the quiet choreography unfold around him. Neighbors backing out of driveways, a delivery truck rolling past without slowing, distant voices carried faintly through the air. Everything continued as it always had. Everything except the one thing that mattered. Helen Whitaker was gone, and no one seemed to feel the shift except him. Beside him, Axel sat still, his body relaxed but not at ease, the kind of stillness that came from focus, not comfort. The dog's amber eyes moved slowly, tracking the same space again and again, as if replaying something only he could sense. Behind them, the police had begun their routine sweep of the house. Doors opened and closed, measured footsteps crossing the wooden floors, radios murmuring in low static bursts. Officer Daniel Harper re-emerged onto the porch, notebook in hand, expression unchanged, calm, methodical, distant. He walked down the steps toward Ryan, stopping just close enough to signal conversation without fully committing to it. "We're not finding anything that points to forced entry," Harper said, his tone steady, almost rehearsed. "No blood, no signs of a struggle that escalated. We'll log it, get a missing person alert out, see what turns up." Ryan didn't look at him right away. His gaze remained fixed down the street, following the invisible line where memory and instinct had begun to overlap. "She didn't leave on her own," he said quietly. Harper shifted slightly, exhaling through his nose in a way that suggested patience rather than agreement. "You said that already." Ryan finally turned his head, meeting the officer's eyes with a level, unblinking stare. "Because it's still true." There was no challenge in his voice, no attempt to convince, just certainty. The kind that didn't ask permission. Harper studied him for a moment longer this time, as if weighing whether the confidence came from experience or assumption. "We'll canvass the neighborhood," he said after a pause. "Knock on doors. Somebody might have seen something." Ryan nodded once, though he didn't expect much from that approach. People saw things every day and forgot them just as quickly. Routine erased detail. It dulled attention. It made the unusual blend into the background until it wasn't unusual anymore. Harper gave a short nod in return and stepped away, already turning back toward his team. Ryan waited until the officer was out of earshot before moving. Axel rose with him instantly, falling into position at his side, leash slack but presence anchored. They walked slowly along the edge of the street, Ryan's gaze sweeping not in wide arcs but in tight, controlled lines, picking apart the environment piece by piece. Mailboxes, driveways, tire marks, subtle disturbances in dirt and gravel. Things most people never noticed because they didn't know what to look for. He stopped near the spot where the van had been. The memory came back clearer now, sharpened by context. The angle of the vehicle, the way it had been positioned slightly off the curb. The engine sound, low, steady, not idling rough. Someone patient, someone waiting. Ryan crouched, his hand hovering just above the ground as he studied the faint impressions pressed into the dirt beyond the asphalt. They weren't fresh enough to stand out immediately, but they were there. Wide tread, evenly spaced, consistent with a heavier vehicle. Not a sedan, not a truck, a van. Axel stepped forward, lowering his head, nose tracing along the same invisible path. His movements were slower now, more deliberate, as if the scent trail had thinned but not disappeared. He paused, adjusted, then continued, pulling gently toward the far end of the block. Ryan followed without hesitation. The leash remained loose, but the direction was clear. A few houses down, a boy sat on the curb, one leg stretched out, the other bent, absent-mindedly spinning the front wheel of a worn bicycle. He was thin, maybe 12, with a narrow face and dark circles under eyes that had learned to stay open longer than they should. His hair was unkempt, falling unevenly across his forehead, and his clothes hung slightly loose on a frame that hadn't quite caught up to growth. There was something in the way he watched the street, not curious, not bored, but attentive in a quiet, habitual way. The kind of attention that came from being overlooked often enough to start noticing everything else. Ryan slowed as he approached, his posture non-threatening, voice even. "You spend a lot of time out here?" The boy glanced up, cautious but not intimidated. "Sometimes." Ryan nodded slightly, letting the silence sit just long enough. "You ever see a white van around here at night?" The boy's fingers stopped spinning the wheel. His eyes shifted, not away, but inward, searching memory. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I think so." Ryan crouched, lowering himself to the boy's level without breaking eye contact. "When?" "Couple nights ago, maybe more." The boy shrugged, but there was certainty behind it. "It didn't have windows in the back, just sat there." Ryan felt the confirmation settle into place, tightening something in his chest. "Same spot?" The boy pointed down the street without looking. "Near that house, the old lady's." Ryan followed the gesture, though he already knew. "You see anyone get in or out?" The boy shook his head. "No, just the van. It stayed a long time, then left." "Which way?" The boy lifted his chin toward the far end of the block, where the street curved slightly before feeding into a larger road. "That way, toward the highway." Ryan nodded once, standing slowly as the pieces aligned more clearly than before. Direction meant exit. Exit meant planning. This wasn't a crime of chance. It was a movement with purpose. Axel returned to his side, sitting without command, his breathing steady, but his focus still locked in the same direction the boy had indicated. Ryan looked down at him briefly, then back at the road. "You picked that up early, didn't you?" he murmured under his breath. Axel's ears flicked once, the only acknowledgement he gave. Ryan turned fully now, his gaze tracing the route mentally, the timing, the positioning, the lack of witnesses who would have paid attention. Everything about it suggested patience, observation. Someone had been watching Helen Whitaker for a long time, not just noticing her routine, but studying it, learning it, waiting for the moment when breaking it would mean something. That was when it clicked completely. This wasn't just about her being taken. It was about why her routine mattered in the first place. People didn't maintain precision like that for no reason. 6 years, same time, same action, no variation. That wasn't habit. That was design. A pattern built deliberately, reinforced daily, meant to be seen, even if no one realized they were seeing it. Ryan exhaled slowly, the realization settling with a weight that felt both heavy and inevitable. "You weren't waiting for anything," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "You were making sure someone would notice if it stopped." Behind him, the police continued their work, still anchored to the house, still focused on what had already happened. But Ryan's attention had shifted completely. The house was no longer the center of the problem. It was just the starting point. He stepped forward, his pace steady, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Axel moved with him instantly, aligned, ready. Somewhere beyond that turn, beyond the quiet edge of the neighborhood, the pattern continued. And now that Ryan could see it, he knew exactly where it led. The highway stretched thin under a fading sky, the last light of day bleeding into a dull orange line behind the distant hills as the outskirts of Asheville gave way to empty lots and forgotten structures. Ryan Vance slowed his pace as the road narrowed, gravel crunching under his boots while Axel moved slightly ahead, his body low, alert, every muscle tuned to something Ryan could not yet see but already trusted. The air out here felt different, less alive, less touched by routine. Abandoned places had a way of holding silence differently, as if they absorbed sound instead of carrying it. Ryan's eyes scanned the perimeter ahead, locking onto the structure that sat just beyond a rusted chain-link fence. A warehouse, long unused by the look of it, its metal siding dulled by time, patches of rust bleeding down from broken seams. windows boarded except for one narrow gap where a faint, unnatural light leaked through. He stopped short of the fence, crouching slightly as Axel paused beside him. The dog's ears were forward, his breathing slow but focused, nose lifting occasionally as if mapping invisible trails in the air. Ryan followed the line of sight, noting the fresh tire tracks cutting through the dirt toward the back of the building. Not old, not abandoned, recently used. That alone confirmed it. Ryan rested one hand briefly against Axel's neck, fingers brushing the coarse fur as if grounding both of them in the moment. "Stay quiet," he murmured. Axel didn't move, didn't blink, just waited. Ryan slipped through a gap in the fence, moving low and controlled, each step placed with intention. The closer he got, the clearer the sounds became, muffled voices, sharp, impatient, echoing faintly from within. He edged toward the side of the warehouse, positioning himself just beneath the broken window. The wood panel covering most of it had splintered, leaving a narrow opening barely wide enough to see through. Ryan leaned in just enough. Inside, the light flickered harshly from a single hanging bulb, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. In the center of the room sat Helen Whitaker, tied to a metal chair, her small frame drawn tight against the restraints. Her silver hair had come loose, strands clinging to her face, and there was a bruise forming along her cheekbone, dark against her pale skin. She looked smaller than Ryan remembered, but there was something in the way she held her head, slightly lifted, refusing to collapse, that spoke of a quiet resilience that hadn't been broken yet. Around her stood three men. The first, closest to her, was tall and lean, his face narrow with sharp cheekbones and a short, unkempt beard that gave him a restless, predatory look. His name, spoken moments later by one of the others, was Derek Shaw. There was impatience in him, the kind that came from needing control and not having it. His movements were quick, agitated, his hands never still as he paced in tight circles. The second man, heavier set, stood near the wall with his arms crossed. His broad shoulders and thick neck gave him a solid, immovable presence. He had a shaved head and a thick scar running from his temple down to his jaw, a jagged line that suggested a past filled with violence he had survived rather than avoided. His name was Marcus Doyle. Unlike Derek, he didn't move much. He watched, calculated, the kind of man who waited for the right moment rather than forcing it. The third man lingered closer to the back exit, thinner, younger, his posture less certain. His eyes darted more than the others, betraying a lack of experience despite the weapon he kept loosely in his grip. His name hadn't been spoken yet, but Ryan didn't need it. He was the weakest link. Derek's voice cut through the air again, sharp and strained. "You've been sitting on it for 6 years," he snapped. "Don't pretend you don't know where it is." Helen lifted her head slowly, her voice quieter but steady. "You think I understand what my son got himself into?" she said. There was exhaustion in her tone, but not fear, not fully. Marcus stepped forward this time, his voice lower, controlled. "You don't need to understand it," he said. "You just need to tell us what he left behind." Ryan's jaw tightened as the pieces locked into place. The sun, the network, the missing piece. Derek scoffed, pacing again. "The data's encrypted, we know that, but he left a trail, a final access point, something only you can lead us to." Helen's eyes shifted slightly, just enough to confirm it. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough. Ryan leaned back from the window, his breathing steady as his mind moved quickly. 3 targets, 1 hostage, limited space, no time to wait. He glanced down at Axel, who was already looking up at him, waiting. Ryan gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That was enough. He moved. The side door gave way under a controlled strike, the wood cracking inward just enough for him to slip through without the explosive noise of a full breach. The moment stretched thin as all 3 men turned at once, their reactions staggered by seconds that Ryan didn't waste. Axel launched first. The dog moved like a shadow breaking form, crossing the distance in a blur before slamming into the third man near the exit. The weapon clattered to the floor as Axel locked onto his arm, pulling him down hard. Ryan closed in on Derek next. The man reached instinctively for his waistband, but Ryan was faster. A single strike to the wrist, a pivot, and Derek was on the ground, breath knocked from him as control shifted instantly. Marcus reacted last, but smartest. He moved toward Helen, grabbing her from behind, one arm locking around her shoulders while the other brought a knife up against her throat. "Stop!" he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos with sudden authority. Everything froze. Ryan straightened slowly, his eyes locking onto Marcus. Axel remained engaged with the third man, holding him down, but the room had shifted into something sharper now. More dangerous. Marcus tightened his grip slightly, the blade pressing just enough to matter. "You take one more step, she bleeds," he said. His voice wasn't panicked, it was measured, he meant it. Ryan didn't move, didn't speak, he watched. Marcus's breathing, his stance, the angle of the blade, the tension in his grip. There it was, a fraction too much pressure, a fraction too much focus on control. Ryan stepped forward. Marcus's arm shifted, just enough. Ryan moved, fast, precise. The knife never had time to cut. Marcus hit the ground a second later, the weapon skidding across the concrete as Ryan forced him down with controlled force. Silence followed, heavy, immediate. Ryan exhaled once, stepping back as the tension broke. Axel released his hold on command, the third man collapsing fully to the ground, no longer a threat. Derek didn't get back up, Marcus didn't move. Ryan turned to Helen, moving quickly but carefully as he cut the restraints binding her wrists. "You're okay," he said, his voice lower now, steady again. Helen didn't answer right away. She looked at him, really looked, as if measuring something deeper than the moment itself. Then she nodded once. "3 days," she said quietly. Ryan paused. "Yeah." A faint, tired expression crossed her face, something between relief and disbelief. "You noticed," she said. Ryan glanced briefly at Axel. He did first. Helen's gaze followed, resting on the dog for a moment longer than expected. Then she nodded again, slower this time. Outside, the distant sound of sirens began to rise again, growing louder as they closed in. But inside the warehouse, the truth had already settled. This wasn't random, it never had been. The ambulance lights pulsed softly against the darkening sky, red and white reflections flickering across the cracked pavement as the chaos of the warehouse slowly gave way to controlled order. Ryan Vance stood just outside the open rear doors, arms resting loosely at his sides, his breathing steady again, though his mind had yet to fully settle. Axel remained beside him, posture relaxed now but still attentive, his amber eyes occasionally shifting toward the interior of the ambulance, as if confirming that the threat had truly passed. The adrenaline had faded, but something else had taken its place. Something quieter, heavier. Not urgency anymore. Understanding. Inside, Helen Whitaker sat on the narrow bench, a gray blanket draped around her shoulders. Up close, the details of her age were more visible. The fine tremor in her hands, the faint discoloration beneath her eyes, the way her posture leaned ever so slightly inward, as if her body had grown used to carrying weight no one else could see. A paramedic knelt in front of her, checking her vitals with practiced efficiency. The paramedic, a woman in her early 30s named Emily Carter, had a calm, grounded presence that seemed to steady the space around her. She was of average height, with dark brown hair pulled into a tight ponytail, her skin lightly freckled, her expression composed but attentive. There was a quiet empathy in the way she worked, quick, professional, but never detached. Her hands moved with care, not just precision. "You're going to be all right," Emily said gently, her voice low, reassuring without being overly soft. Helen nodded faintly, though her gaze drifted past Emily, settling on Ryan. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Helen shifted slightly, her voice quiet but clear. "I wasn't waiting for anything," she said. Ryan stepped closer, resting one hand lightly against the metal frame of the ambulance. "I figured that," he replied. Helen let out a small breath, something close to a tired laugh. "People always thought I was." Her eyes lowered briefly, then lifted again. "A letter, a son, something that never came." Ryan didn't interrupt. "They never asked," she continued, "and I never told them." Emily glanced between them, but said nothing, quietly stepping aside as if recognizing that what mattered now wasn't medical. It was something else entirely. Helen adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, her fingers tightening slightly in the fabric. "My son," she began, pausing just long enough to steady her voice. "He got involved in something he couldn't get out of. Money, accounts, things that moved in ways they weren't supposed to. Ryan's expression didn't change, but his focus sharpened. "He didn't tell me everything," Helen said, "but he told me enough. Enough to know that if something happened to him, someone might come looking." Ryan nodded once. That part, at least, matched what he had heard inside the warehouse. "So he built a way out," she continued. "Not for himself, for the truth. He split it, hid it, made sure no one could get to it all at once." Her eyes flickered slightly, the memory clearly still alive in her mind. "And he left me one piece. Not the information itself, just the path to it, the last step." Ryan leaned slightly closer. "You knew how to find it." Helen nodded. Not what it was, not what it meant, just where it would lead. Outside, Axel shifted his weight, ears flicking briefly as if reacting to the subtle change in tone. Ryan glanced at him, then back at Helen. "They came years later," she said. "At first, I thought they were just watching. I could feel it sometimes, the way the street didn't feel the same." Ryan understood that feeling. He had lived in it for years. "So I gave them something to watch," Helen said quietly. "Something predictable." Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. "The mailbox," he said. Helen gave a small nod. "Every day, same time, same movement, no variation." She looked down at her hands again, then back up. "If I disappeared quietly, no one would notice. But if I became part of the day, part of the pattern, then breaking it would mean something." Ryan felt something shift in his chest, not surprise, but recognition. It was strategy. Simple, patient, effective. "You turned yourself into a signal," he said. Helen's lips pressed together faintly. "I hoped someone would read it." There was no pride in her voice, no certainty that it would work, just the quiet admission of a plan built on the smallest possible chance. Emily stepped forward again briefly, adjusting the wrap around Helen's wrist, but her movements were softer now, more careful, as if aware she was standing in the middle of something fragile. "For 6 years," Helen continued, her voice lower now, "no one did." The words settled heavily in the space between them. Ryan didn't look away. "I started to think," she said, pausing as her voice caught slightly, "that maybe it didn't matter. That maybe I had made myself visible for nothing." Her eyes lifted to meet his fully now, steady despite everything. "I thought no one would notice." Ryan exhaled slowly, then tilted his head slightly toward Axel. "He did," he said. Helen's gaze shifted to the dog, studying him more closely this time. Axel held her gaze without moving, calm, present, unafraid. A faint smile touched the corner of Helen's mouth, small but real. "Then I suppose that was enough." The distant sound of radios and movement continued outside, but it felt farther away now, less important. The truth had already been said. Ryan stepped back slightly as the paramedics prepared to move Helen, giving them space without fully leaving. Axel remained close, his body aligned with Ryan's, his attention still anchored but no longer tense. As the ambulance doors closed, Helen's eyes remained on Ryan for just a moment longer. Then she gave the smallest nod. Ryan returned it. No words, none needed. The next morning came quieter. The fog had lifted earlier this time, leaving the street clearer, brighter, as if the world had decided to move forward without acknowledging what had almost been lost. Ryan and Axel followed their usual route. Same pace, same rhythm, but something had changed. As they approached the house, Ryan's eyes moved to the porch automatically, and this time, she was there. Helen Whitaker stood at the top of the steps, one hand resting lightly on the railing, her posture slower but steadier than it had been the day before. The blanket was gone, replaced by the same simple cardigan she had worn so many times before. She stepped down carefully, one step at a time, moving toward the mailbox with the same measured pace that had defined her routine for 6 years. Ryan didn't stop walking, Axel didn't slow, but both of them watched. Helen reached the mailbox, opened it, and paused. Just like always, but this time, the pause meant something different. Not waiting, knowing. She closed it gently and turned back toward the house. Halfway up the path, she stopped, looked up. Ryan was already looking at her. For a second, the world seemed to hold still again, but not with tension this time, with understanding. Ryan lifted 2 fingers from his side in a small, familiar gesture. Helen nodded once in return, and that was it. The routine continued, but it wasn't just a routine anymore. It was a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person who doesn't look away. Sometimes miracles don't come as lightning from the sky. They come quietly, through the eyes of someone who chooses not to look away. Maybe it wasn't coincidence that Ryan and his canine were there. Maybe it was something greater. A reminder that God works through people, through moments, through the smallest decisions to care. In our everyday lives, we pass by countless faces, routines, and silent signals. Most go unnoticed. But what if one small moment of attention, one act of awareness, could change someone's fate? Maybe the miracle isn't in what happens, but in who chooses to see it. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs a reminder that they are not invisible. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories of hope, faith, and unseen miracles, don't forget to subscribe and be part of this journey. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and place you exactly where you are meant to be, because sometimes you are the miracle someone else is waiting for.